Welcome to another episode of Lunchbreak with Lightspeed. And today we have an amazing, inspiring, really young founder, Naman Pushp from Airbound, who's building one of the world's most efficient aircrafts and then using it for drone deliveries. Well, Naman, we waited 3 years to get this podcast going, and I'm really, really happy. I know you live very far off, so thank you for making your way all the way here. So tell us about what the company does, and then we'll dive into some specific questions, starting with you, the company, the market, and the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, high level, what we're doing is we're building drone delivery. We're trying to really solve the cost problem. I think for me, what really doesn't make sense is that drones are significantly lighter than cars. You don't need human operators, yet somehow the cost of drone delivery is almost as high as 5 to 10x what traditional ground-based delivery looks like. And there is no reason why this should be the case. I think we very quickly realized that this is a problem on hardware, this is a problem on manufacturing, and we needed to solve these issues. We needed to figure out, how do you scale up carbon fiber the right ways? How do you build an incredibly lightweight aircraft? How do you build an incredibly efficient aircraft? And all of this stems from the general principle that logistics will fundamentally change with autonomy. I think the core difference between us and other drone delivery companies is that right now the rest of the world is moving towards trying to make autonomy happen. Drone delivery companies today, or generally any autonomous logistics company today, is built around how can we usher in this era of autonomy. Airbound is built on the principle is that the era of autonomy will happen whether we do it or not. We are going to move towards a world of autonomous logistics. How do you win the hardest in a world where autonomy is real? And that is actually not a software problem. It's not an autonomy problem. It's a hardware problem. Because the one thing that your software cannot change is your fundamental cost per kilometer. How efficient is your hardware? Once logistics becomes autonomous, it's a physics problem. It's an energy problem. It's moving mass from point A to B. And there are only two things that matter. How much mass are you moving, and how efficiently are you moving that mass? And we've done a lot of work to tackle exactly those two problems.
Awesome. So we'll dig into a lot of this stuff. And before we dig into that, let's dig into you a little bit. I remember, and maybe this is not exactly accurate, but you started building your first drone when you were early teenager, and that's very unusual. Tell us about your life story. Where did you grow up? What got you into drones? And then what got you into starting Airbound?
Yeah, so I mean, I moved around a lot as a kid. I think, Mumbai has always been my home, but, moved to Hyderabad early on for like a year or so, then moved back to Bombay. Then, moved to Malaysia. Actually did a lot of my primary schooling there. That's where I got my first exposure to robotics via Lego. So this was around 5th grade. I started doing
Fifth grade robotics. Okay,
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Lego robotics, Lego robotics, but that was there. Then when I was back in India, I dived deeper into Lego robotics, but I think for me that aha moment was really when I moved beyond that, right? When I moved towards, robotics competitions where you were working with, what I would call like real adult materials, right? You look out at the world, you don't see things made out of Lego, but once you start working with like aluminum and steel, you're just like, oh yeah, things are actually made out of that. I can make real objects with this. And I think it helped me realize that there isn't this sort of like magical thing that you need to grow older to be able to make things, to be able to build stuff, which I think opened my eyes a lot, right? Like this happened maybe around when I was 13, 14 or so. And so since then, I also really wanted to spend a bunch of time just tinkering and building my own things, right? I always, and I continue to find it magical that like you can just think of something and physically will it into existence, right? I think that was a magic I found in hardware that I could not find in software, which is why I was so attracted to the medium. And yeah, I think around when I was 15, COVID rolled, I was really bored. And I wanted to do something a little bigger than the random projects I'd been tinkering around with here and there. So spent a bunch of time. I'd seen a few things on YouTube. I'd seen how drones were being used for medical deliveries to save lives, to enable deliveries in areas that did not otherwise have access to logistics. And I realized that is interesting. That to me felt a lot more interesting than the previous drone delivery vision that everyone had been fed, which was basically you get your Amazon deliveries in 30 minutes. Like it made me realize that there was something exponential about the technology, that it was not just bringing marginal improvements to the masses. So that got me really excited. Initial idea was just like, hey, how do I build this with low infrastructure? In fact, actually, the very first idea was just, like, let's just build something, put it out there, and maybe someone more competent than me can actually solve the problem.
But you were not in aerodynamics, like you didn't have a bachelor's degree in aerodynamics and aerospace and all that stuff. So how did you even learn the basics of, I don't know, Navy or Stokes, man? Like
Yeah.
how does aerodynamicity work? And all
Yeah.
those things are really hard to understand. So tell us more about that. Like how did that journey go for you?
No, yeah, I know. I was hopelessly underqualified. I was 15 years old and I did not even have a PhD. But
Sometimes I would say we have a belief that sometimes PhDs is the wrong way to go start a company. But,
yeah, but no, I think I strongly believe this for like a lot of engineering, and this is like part of the core engineering principles we build out in the company. Uh, and I think this actually holds true beyond engineering as well, right? I think everything you know is basically built upon a certain base of axioms, right? I think math is the perfect way to think about this. Every single principle we know in math is built upon like 6 or 7 axioms, right? And it's just like really basic shit, right? Like parallel lines never meet and all. And it's just from these simple principles you can derive such complex concepts. And I think that's always been my approach to learning as well. That you memorize a few basic concepts that you just hold as true no matter what. But these should be very, very basic concepts. And then on top of that, you can build more. I think the reason why people see a lot of these topics as very complex is because they think you have to memorize the high level concepts. But my point is you can just naturally derive them. And if you can do that, one, you're never going to forget it. And two, you can then extend those concepts beyond where they exist, right?
Yeah.
You can never change your axioms, right? Anything that is more basic than your axioms, you cannot touch. You cannot make it.
This is a very favorite BC term called first principles thinking. This is
yeah,
what you're
pretty much.
Yeah.
I think like we sort of, so I like to extend it a bit. Like I call it just like fundamentalist engineering, because the reality with engineering is you can't truly, like in theory from like the 7 axioms of math, I could derive all my engineering equations, but there's not much value in doing that. Right? The way I see it is that it's kind of like we're doing calculus, and to do calculus really well, don't memorize any of the calculus equations, but you should know algebra like the back of your hand. You should be really, really good at algebra. You may not need to understand like down to the very fundamentals, right? Like if you see like Principia Mathematica, it takes them like 200 pages to derive 1 + 1 = 2. Don't do that. Have a slightly higher base. But still keep that base shallower than
So essentially, your first principles build out an understanding of what's the minimum required knowledge needed to build a minimum viable drone that flies and doesn't crash often enough.
Basically, because a lot of the principles behind the drone are just really simple design principles, right? Like pretty much all of the structural engineering we've done just derives from like the beam bending equation, right? A lot of the design decisions we made just came down to like, oh, less moving parts equals better. Right? There's nothing super complex here. There's nothing that, you need a degree to learn.
It's easy to understand, but really, really hard to put together.
Exactly, right? For the longest time, I never even used any amount of calculus on the drone. Right now, as we're moving towards more complex control algorithms, we've started to implement a bit of it. But there's like, you can understand 95% of what we do without even knowing calculus. There is no college level knowledge required to build what we've built.
Got it. On that topic. So you began building your own first drone at what age? 14?
15.
15? Okay. And then fast forward to the company. Like, give us maybe a 30-second view of what all things you tried to do before you said, you know what, screw it, I'm going to start a company. I think I have enough to start one.
I think it's always been like a bit of a fuzzy flow. It's not like there was this one day where we're like, yes, Airbound is a company. Now, to some extent, like you have to pick that day, and you can like somewhat pick the incorporation day as like, this is where stuff happened. But I think broadly the story was just that I never had the intention to really start a company, right? I just wanted to work on a meaningful project, and I was also very reasonable in my ambitions, right? When I was starting out, I'm not like, this is going to redefine drone delivery. I'm going to like, perform better than like Google and multi-billion-dollar startups and all. I was just like, hey man, If maybe a 15-year-old kid does an illegal drone delivery on a balcony and it captures the attention of the news, like maybe someone more competent than me can solve the problem. And over time, you just realize that like, okay, maybe like you just get attached to the problem and you're like, I'm solving this myself.
And no one is gonna come solve it for you. You just have to do it yourself.
Exactly. You also realize that it started off as like, a project on just open source platform, working with a bunch of volunteers. I thought that like, hey, there's a lot of smart engineers volunteering here. They'll help me figure it out. They're more competent than I am. Then you realize that like, okay, volunteer work doesn't, because like it's not their job on the line. It's not their baby. And I'm like, hey, I did everything myself. Maybe I can do more. I discovered YC videos like maybe about six-ish months into the process, and I was like, this startup idea actually seems decent. It seems like a good way to get the capital required to make this thing work. So that was there. Maybe like first 6 months were really just entirely, 6 to 8 months were entirely funded by like a $500 grant that I'd gotten.
$500 grant?
Yes. That was my entire, the first drone that we made was completely made in that budget, including all the tooling for it. So the funniest thing is like I couldn't afford a 3D printer. So I used a regular printer and I just like split up the aircraft into multiple cross sections. I printed out each cross section. I cut up pieces of foam. I stuck them together and I sanded the thing to like make the fuselage. It was like 20 hours of sanding. Although I think throughout my Airbound career, I've probably clocked a couple thousand hours of sanding. It's just a lot of just rubbing sheets and smoothing out surfaces. But that was there. I think then, after this, we were able to get like then $1,000 grant. And I was like, oh my God, this is so much money. I can buy like a 10,000 rupee printer. And I had access to 3D printing. I started making these parts. I think that caught the attention of Grad Capital. We, reached out to them and they gave us our first actual check. I think there, over the next sort of year and a half, I was still in school. So I was still sort of juggling this part-time. If you went back in time and asked me if I was doing this part-time, I would say, no, I'm doing this full-time. But like, you can't build a team while you're still in school. It's not the most sustainable to be like school kid by day, founder by night. We managed to raise, slightly more capital from like angels and all. Maybe total funding was around 100K or so at that time, which was, again, not a lot for a startup, but, from an Indian parent POV, like a kid getting a crore, like while being in school is not zero. They're like, people are actually funding this. Yeah. And so I really wanted to make Airbound my entire life, right? I was in fact even contemplating dropping out of high school, and my parents were like, not a chance. That is not happening.
But you did drop out of college.
Yeah, so I never went to college. So I think part of what we were able to negotiate is, so relevant context is like before I got any funding, like when I was 15, I somehow ended up telling them that like, if this works out, I don't want to go to college. And they were like, it was pandemonium. And like after a week of negotiations, we reached a settlement of, if you get an investor to fund you, we'll maybe consider it. Because they thought that like I wasn't serious about this at all. They're like, no way he's gonna do that. And so they're like, we're sorted. We did a good deed. Yeah. We gave him the optionality.
It's an easy give.
Exactly, right? And like it's not gonna happen. Yeah. We're scot free. And then I got funded, and they're like, we have to like consider this possibility now. But I think one of the luxuries that I had is that I applied to colleges internationally, and so you do have a gap year framework. And the agreement we reached to is that, hey, let me take a gap year while I can. Let me maintain my seat, and let's just see what happens. And I think in the first year, that's when we ended up getting funded by you guys, by Lightspeed. This was when I was 17, turning 18, and I think that was really, when I believe Airbound became a company, right? Like I think, when we signed that term sheet, when we incorporated the entity, when we started just formalizing everything, that's when we hired our first employees, etc. And so where Airbound was when I started my gap year versus where Airbound was when I ended my gap year were two very different places. And I think by that time it had become obvious that like, look, man, I'm not going to leave this for college, right? Like I got $1.5 million. Yeah. This is working. Yeah. I see a future here, you see a future here. And like, even if this completely crashes and fails, I'll probably get into a better college, right?
Yeah.
Like it's
Better than CMU. Not that many. Better than CMU, but okay. Remember your mother had to sign. No, I think you had to turn 18 to sign the term sheet.
yes,
It
it
was
was.
not, which is very unusual, even though we do back some really, really young founders like Avase and many others, but
the
at Pixel. But
first legally binding document I signed.
you're very happy you did that.
Yes.
Awesome. So let's talk about this category, right? So
Mhm.
again, like I'm just playing the layman's picture because it's something that I was also wondering about before we made the investment. Like, do you really expect the world to have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of drones just flying around like Jetsons and landing in people's backyards on their, I don't know, top of their houses and rooftops and I don't know, wherever else? It doesn't sound like it's very likely.
Yeah.
But it is happening in some parts of China. It is happening in some parts of US. It is happening with Narayana Health in India and will happen more. What's your vision? How does this look visually? How does it look if you were to go convince a layman
Yeah.
that this is happening, this is bound to happen? What would you say to them?
Absolutely. Like I'd say a few different things, right? And I think a lot of this is on just refining that picture that you're imagining, right? Because I think there's a few small details that are different, which do make a meaningful difference, right? I think first is on the scale, right? I don't think you will see like, thousands or hundreds of thousands of drones in the sky. I think you will see billions of drones in the sky.
Wow. Okay.
I think that is the world that we're heading towards. And the answer for like, what will the sky look like, right? Like a lot of people have asked, like, if this works, will I be able to see the sun, right? Like you do, like these are real questions that people have to ask. And I do think they're valid questions. Like the answer starts to become really obvious when you like live and breathe this every day, because you just realize how non-invasive these drones are, right? Firstly, when this drone is cruising in the sky, you physically cannot hear it. It doesn't matter if there's one, if there's 100, like you just can't hear these drones. They are completely silent. Even if they're flying right over your head, the only person that can hear the drone is the person getting the delivery. Thing number two is that the sky is just like, I think people underestimate how huge. It is huge, man. I think there's like a few good analogies that like help paint a picture around this, right? Firstly, let's look at roads, right? Roads hold millions of cars. And the way I would describe roads is that they're fundamentally one-dimensional construct. You've basically created a bunch of lines. Even a multi-lane highway is just like 7, 8 lines in a row. It's very limited in what you can do with it, right? Like 1D does not scale very well. And cars are not like space efficient, right? Like, for example, cars can only just move in one direction, right? Like highways are not a good way to transport things around. Now, the sky, in my eyes, is like the ultimate thing. I say the sky is 3D. The sky can handle trillions of vehicles. And that's really the future that we want to move to, like getting to that scale, those kinds of scales. So in fact, if you see billions of drones in the sky, you actually won't see much. Like honestly, a lot of people will not even notice. It'll just look like there are slightly more birds in the area. That's about it, right? Like it's, especially if you see some of our early flight videos, we used to fly in this field where there were a bunch of kites. And God, it was really hard to film the drone because you would just lose it among the kites. You would start following a random bird instead because they look the same, they look identical. And when your drone is cruising at altitude, it actually looks much smaller than a bird. It's really a dot in the sky that unless someone points out it is exactly right there, you will not notice.
So let's play it forward from there. Like, so birds and drones coexist in the sky. You can't see either of them very well unless they really come really close to you. You don't notice the sound, you don't notice the sight. Then when the sky meets the earth, you're going to deliver something to the ground. What do you think will happen there? Because I don't expect a drone to come knocking on my doorstep, but a human can, right? So there must be some sort of a human involvement either in the pickup or the delivery piece. How do you imagine this actually will play out in the real world for, I don't know, e-commerce, healthcare, any category?
No, absolutely. And like I think this is where you get to like, I think the crux of what is difficult with drone delivery, right? These handshakes are very, very complex. And I think we spent a lot of time trying to figure out this flow exactly, right? Like, how do we deliver to someone's doorstep? We thought about like, okay, maybe you can deliver at a society gate. Maybe you can convince the guards to bring something up. Maybe you deliver things to terraces and you have guys stationed on the terraces whose entire job is to bring it down and up. You could reasonably get enough volume there. Like, what are these stopgap solutions? I think there are versions of this that could work. But I would say the simple answer with us on this whole last mile framework is that we are yet to figure it out. I think what we've realized after speaking to a lot of customers, after trying to get this work, is that there's the first layer that needs to be crossed is just building a mental intuition for what drone delivery looks like. People need to get used to a world where drones move things around. And if I compound that difficulty with also trying to figure out the logistics flow of making last mile work, it's just too much to take in. It's too much to take in, especially for a company as focused on tech as we are, right? Then we'll have to diverge. We'll have to make half of us an ops company, half of us a tech company, and managing some part of you is managing humans, some part of you is managing drones. It's an ugly flow. I don't see it as elegant, right? Which is something that we care a lot about. So what we realized is, you know what? Let's not look at this right now. Let's focus on mid-mile movements. We don't want to be that flashy drone company that is going to deliver things to your doorstep, that's going to land on your porch and do all of those things. Our idea is to start off by just being that company that just silently works in the background, right? Like be the AWS behind it all, right? What happens when a dark store runs out of stock, right? You can just have a drone move an item there. Now let's say if you're buying items from a superstore, right? Those usually, and this is there, right? Like you open your quick commerce apps, you'll see a bunch of items showing like 20-minute delivery instead of 10. Because what needs to happen is that items move from the superstore to the dark store, and then a rider picks them up from the dark store and delivers it to your doorstep.
So let's bring a commercial lens to it,
Yes.
right? So can maybe for the people that don't fully get the back end logistics of
Yes.
e-commerce and quick commerce companies, of many of which are working with you now. What are they doing that is unscalable or expensive or does not really meet the customer's needs because things run out of the dark stores too soon and then it takes too long to refill them?
Yeah.
Give us some 20-second view of that, and how do you plan to fix? Which parts of it do you plan to fix, and how?
So I think like maybe a really good way to generalize things is that customers want things fast, and customers want as many things fast as they can get, right? I think with the whole rise of quick commerce in India, initially the thought was like, okay, this is just groceries, right? This is just groceries that you otherwise need to get in like 10, 15 minutes that people are demanding in 10, 15 minutes. But we realized, no, that's not true. People are demanding like phones in 10 minutes. People are demanding watches in 10 minutes, chargers, electronics, fashion, everything. And now it's getting to the point where it's genuinely eating into e-commerce share. But we realize that this is a fundamentally broken model. You cannot have a dark store within 2 kilometers from everyone's home that holds as much inventory as an Amazon warehouse. This is fundamentally unscalable. And nobody's really figured out the answer to this, right? Like, this is really a problem statement of how can you move items both very quickly and very cost effectively in small packet sizes across large distances. And this is exactly what we are better than anyone else in the world at doing.
So let's dive into the technology. Like, what are the core pieces you've had to solve to get to this vision? What do you think are the hardest problems that are yet to be solved right now?
So one interesting point that I was having a conversation the other day and someone brought it up is just like, okay, how are you industrializing drones? And I think that was like a very interesting framing, because I do think if I had to sum up everything into just one core problem, it is that. It is how do you industrialize this tech? And I think industrialize is a great word, because I see a lot of parallels between the drones that we're building and drone delivery and the steam engine, right? The obvious things being that it's new forms of transport. It can, shorten distances, bring places closer together, and enable like a lot more commerce than what happened previously. But I think the most interesting point here is that the industrialization of the steam engine, in my eyes, is fundamentally linked to the industrialization of steel production. You had to unlock this new material class to be able to unlock this new method of transport. And I see the exact same thing playing out with drones. Our core thesis here is that the industrialization of delivery drones is the same as the industrialization of carbon fiber. And there is no other drone delivery company that is thinking about things this way. We focus a lot on the way you're able to make things out of carbon fiber. We believe that there is a huge blank space in where carbon fiber can be versus where carbon fiber is today. I think carbon fiber is like we're in this transition phase, the same way we slowly transition from woods to metals, right? People think it was fast. People just point to the Industrial Revolution, but actually we learned how to smelt steel thousands of years ago. It took thousands of years to transition fully from like woods to metals. I believe that if we have this sort of steam engine moment with drones, with carbon fiber, we need to industrialize tech to get to that level, to a world where, if we're having this podcast again 20 years later, like the mic you'll have will be made out of carbon fiber.
So what are you doing to make that world real? Like, give us some sense of the technology that is being built out, manufacturing, carbon fiber.
So a big crux of this is really just built around weight, right? Similarly, like steel per kg is, I mean, for the longest time was still a lot more expensive than wood, right? But why would you then use steel for this? Because I need to use a lot less steel than I would if this was made out of wood. It would be significantly heavier. Similarly, it's the same logic with carbon fiber. On a per kg basis, carbon fiber, yes, it is more expensive than steel, but honestly, less than you would think. It's less than like a 2x difference if you just look at the raw material input costs. But if you think about the structures you can make, we can make structures out of carbon fiber that are 10x lighter than steel. We recognize that like broadly the world moves towards a place where atoms are just fundamentally expensive, right? The more mass you have to put into something, the more expensive it's going to be. And with drones, this is like exceptionally true, right? The lighter my frame is, the smaller my battery can be, the smaller my motors can be. It's a cascading effect. So you see this as being the clear breakthrough area, but this applies to everything else. So I think the biggest crux was just how do you make structures out of carbon fiber that are significantly lighter than everything else. Because people today have not gotten 10x gains out of carbon fiber. And the reason is that people are still thinking about carbon fiber like a metal. The goal is, hey, I am Boeing, I have this metal part. Let me replace it with carbon fiber. Because if I create an entirely new shape, an entirely new structure, that's a whole other regulatory mess, and I don't want to get into that. That's what Boeing has to do. That's what SpaceX has to do, because they're in heavily regulated industries. You can't make a part the size of this room and like meaningfully change the shape and structure and material all at once. Because we are small, we have the luxury of being able to do that. And we've realized that, hey, there's a lot of different unique structures you can make out of carbon fiber. Carbon fiber and composites in general are literally just a cloth that you apply a glue to. This is a very different manufacturing process from metals. It can be worse if you think from a metal first framework. You can't take a block of carbon fiber and melt it out. You can't just make an I-beam out of carbon fiber. You can't melt it and solidify it into parts. You can't bend it into different shapes. But then carbon fiber can do things that metal cannot. Right? Carbon fiber can be built much thinner. Carbon fiber can be combined with other materials like foams in really interesting ways, right? It's hard to go into more details without compromising IP, but there's I'd say that carbon fiber is inherently, it's not a 3D material, it's what I call a manifold, right? Like it's a 2D material shaped in a 3D space. And the way you have to think about manufacturing that is just very different to the way you think about manufacturing metals. It requires a completely different thought process. It requires a lot of things to be built out from scratch. But my belief is that it is fundamentally a very scalable process.
So give us a view of the company 6 months ago in terms of the manufacturing, the safety protocols, the crash rates, the number of flights per drone per day, number of drones, number of parts per drone, and today, where are you now in all those metrics? What do you really measure in the company to, because in software it's easy to measure, instrument and measure success and like whatever, right?
Yeah.
How do you measure the success of your company? In which dimensions, and where were they 6 months ago, a year ago, and today?
It's a good question. And I think this is like fundamentally a hard question with deep tech companies. I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of like, here is a metric, let me like max out this metric. But it's so much of a multifaceted thing that you can really just do metric maxing for like maybe 3 months at a time. Otherwise, then you go in the wrong direction. And so our targets keep on changing. But I think a few things that like we have broadly been working on improving over time have been some of the items that you've been discussing, right? I think manufacturing rate has improved a lot, right? We used to, I think sort of 8-ish months ago, we were just starting out, on a manufacturing flow. I mean, we tried to see like what happens if we push on manufacturing, and we realized we're making like 1.5 drones a month. It was just tricky, and like things would break. The biggest problem is that like every drone would be like a piece of art. and not in the good way, right? Like there was something different here, there was something different there. You did not have consistent hardware, which meant that then you couldn't test software either. Everyone was blaming different things, right? Like the firmware team was just like, my firmware is great, it's this drone that's crap. Right? Anyone putting a new mechanism is just like, hey man, like this drone is just why it's failing. Like nobody knew why things were breaking. So we realized that we needed to get to like version and quality control very aggressively. And so in like a 6-month push, we managed to increase our manufacturing rate by more than 30x. So, get to producing about 2 drones a day. And that's a manufacturing rate we've kept steady for now. And now we're looking to, ramp up.
And as you ramp that up, what's been the safety outcomes? And
so I think broadly, like safety, again, over that 6-month period I think it increased by about 40x sort of our failure rates.
What does that mean in the numbers? Number of crash drones per month, per day?
It's hard to give like clean exact numbers to this, because some part of this is where, you look at just what is your crash rate per flight. But then now if you're doing longer flights, then, that number is going to look higher. Or you can look at it on a per flight hour basis. But then if most of your crashes are in takeoff landing, you can then reduce that number by just doing longer range flights. So it's one of these like really finicky metrics. Crash rate per month is also a terrible metric, because now if the next month you're flying 10x as much, your crash rate per month is going to look higher as well. So it's tricky. We've used sort of some funky blended averages and all. But I think overall, like, without getting too deep into like internal metrics, it's just like it's really been that trend of how has safety been increasing over time.
So you've grown manufacturing capacity by 30x and
safety by 40x.
By 40x. So you've reduced safety by crashes by 40 times.
Yes.
As you grow on that's amazing. I know we're coming at the end of the podcast, but there's something that I think I've been thinking a lot about, and I'd love to get your perspective on the future of this industry, right? So you said the sky will be full of drones, but then you're also replacing a lot of the industry that is set up on trucks and, I don't know, like 3-wheelers, 4-wheelers, scooters on the ground. And there is this perception in the market that, trucks are efficient. You got one driver, you can fill it up with 10,000 packages. Versus the drone will have 4 or 5, maybe 1 or 2. How do you think this idea that a big truck can carry a lot of stuff, but a small drone can carry few but faster? There's a balance, there's a trade-off. How do you see this trade-off play out in the industry? And then 5 years out, what do you think this would look like?
Yeah, I think this is really the heart of what we are trying to prove to the whole world, because our intuitions around logistics are just so deep-rooted, right? Big payload means more efficient, because that's the pattern that we've seen, right? What's more efficient than, a scooter, a small van? What's more efficient than that? A truck, a bigger truck, right? What's more efficient than that? A train, a cargo ship, right? The most efficient vehicles are the ones that carry the most payload. And I would say that this is really built around the one fundamental principle of logistics that completely changes when autonomy kicks in, which is that today with logistics, no matter where your payload is, it always needs to be chaperoned by someone. Whether you are carrying 5 packages on a scooter, there needs to be one person driving it. Or if you are carrying 50,000 packages in a truck, there still needs to be one person driving it. That one person's cost gets amortized much better. If you also think about this from an energy perspective, that person's weight gets amortized much better. With a scooter, you are generally moving 150 kilos of person and vehicle just to move 3 kgs of payload. That's a terrible ratio. Whereas with a truck, you're maybe moving around 40 to 50 tons to move 20 tons of payload. That's a much, much better ratio. The point is that like this completely changes when you move towards autonomy. I can get to this 1:1 ratio, or even better than that ratio, with 1 kg, 3 kg, 5 kg payload drones.
How?
Right? Because you don't have these fixed weights, right? We want to think about logistics from an energy perspective. And from an energy perspective, whether I am moving 1 kg over 1 kilometer 100 times, or I'm moving 100 kgs over 1 kilometer, that energy cost is the same. The amount of work in the physics sense you have to do is the same.
I think this is where I think the world needs to understand better, because the psychological perception is, look, you fit 100 packages into a box, into a truck, and then you unload those 100 packages on the other side of it. What you're saying is I'm going to just do one drone and one package, and I'll just fly 100 drones at the
Exactly.
same time. It'll still take the same amount of time. I mean, the truck will take an hour to go from A to B. You will take a few minutes,
Yes.
but the same 100 packages get delivered around the same time. But then there is this idea of hooking something into a drone, putting it in there one by one, letting it go, letting it fly together with the other 99 drones, then letting it come down, unhook it. That still feels like a lot of unscalable labor.
Hmm.
How do you see that play out?
Yes, absolutely. So I think there's a few different points to this, right? I think point number one is really going to be on how do you firstly, what are the advantages you get out of this, right? Like why do I even care? Why would I even do this, right? And I would say a big part of this is that we want to eliminate the complex delivery flow that you see today. Let's say you want to get something from Amazon. It takes like 2 days to deliver. That thing is sitting in a warehouse in the same city as you. It is sitting 30 kilometers away from you at this very moment. It does not take 2 days to travel 30 kilometers. Because what happens is that you have to wait till there's 20 tons worth of items to be loaded on a truck. Then that truck moves to a bunch of distribution centers. Those then get sorted. Sorting takes a huge amount of time, right? Like roughly every single sort center a delivery has to go through adds plus 1 day to delivery time. What we can do with these drones is completely eliminate the need for sort centers, right? What I can say is, look, there's a bunch of dark stores across the city. Let me just pick something up from the central warehouse and move it to the dark store that's closest to your home. Why can't we do this in the existing flow? Because the existing flow, to get that kind of cost efficiency I have with my drone, you would need a big truck. A big truck cannot just go to your dark store. It needs to then go to every dark store, which is too complex of a route. So instead they say, hey, let's create like larger nodes which it can go to where items are then sorted. This sorting takes a huge amount of labor, a huge amount of time. And the operations of these sort centers are also insanely hard to do. With the sort center, the way it generally works is like up till 8 a.m. you have 0 packages. Suddenly at 8:01 you get 10,000 packages dumped on you. And you have to deal with all of that volume at once, right? What if you just got one package fed to you every minute and you know exactly where that package needs to go because it's scanned and you know what's going on in that package at every time? You don't need to sort things anymore. You completely eliminate a lot of parts of the flow. That is the advantage that you get. And for the customer, what this means is now 2-day delivery becomes a sub 1 hour delivery because we can do that 30 kilometers in 30 minutes.
So what you're saying is there needs to be some fundamental shift in how this warehousing,
Exactly.
the running of the warehouse needs to be fundamentally shifted to then unlock the value on the other side of it, because in a way your method of doing it is a lot more simpler.
Yes.
It's got a lot more elegance to it, but the world is now fitted into a very inelegant, inefficient flow that they need to get out of to be able to absorb the flow that you are going to propose.
Precisely. And
Got
that's
it.
the point. This is also why we're not touching last mile, because I know I need to change the way warehouses work. If I need to change the way warehouses work and change the way societies work and customers interact with packages, it's not happening. Let's change warehouses first. When we get to warehouses that are really built around drones, then I can start to change the consumer behavior. It's not that we'll never target the last mile, but we're going to get there second. We're first going to target the mid mile and these, inter movements, which are so inefficient. And we're going to, the nice thing is that it's such a simple problem that you can actually find an optima. Like there is a curve you can optimize down and you can get to some really good unit economics. And I think the thing that's like helped, because this intuition is still really hard to break. Like I can give you all these justifications from first principles. Like it's especially if if you're a customer of ours, right? Like if you're someone who's been in the logistics industry for the past decade, like I'm used to working with 10 kg bags, right? Like I got to change my bags, I got to change my interest. Like what's going to happen there? We've done this before, right? We've done this before with the movement of information, with the internet, right? You go back to, honestly, even just like 30, 40 years ago, if I wanted to send a message to someone sitting in the US, sitting somewhere else in the world, I'd have to send them a mail. That mail follows the laws of logistics. It would move across different hubs. It would move through different sort centers.
True.
It would then have to go. Today, when I send a text message,
direct.
It's direct, right?
Yeah.
And there is enough volume of text messages to do this bundling if we wanted to. It would barely take any extra time if my text message would get bundled with like a million other text messages in India and then get ported over to the US, because we're sending like million text messages every second, right? Like the rates of this are insane. But it doesn't, because there's not actually a cost advantage there.
Very
because there is
analogy.
no human chaperoning your text messages. It is just energy that needs to move. And we're saying we can do that with atoms. The most cost-efficient way between two places has to be the shortest path between them. A straight line should be the best way to move items.
Amazing. Love it. It's almost like moving atoms the way electrons move.
Absolutely.
Fascinating. This is amazing. It really blows my mind the way you think. Maybe the last thing, you started a company when you were very young, and there are a ton of young founders who are gonna learn from your experience and get inspired by it. And I know you're scaling the company really fast. 30 seconds, what would you advise to a founder be in some of this hard to build categories? A lot of attention is being paid to AI, software, all of those things. But in these hard to and important categories, what would you advise to a founder be?
I think it's a lot of just focus on what matters, and just, I think you as a founder know what are the important things for you to succeed. I think what are probably the best decisions I've made on the journey of Airbound have been where I have gotten some very credible advice from some very credible people, and I have completely ignored that advice because nobody knows your business better than you, right? Like, don't listen to what, some podcast is saying. Don't listen to what I'm saying. Just listen to what makes sense. Because if you are just listening to other people and building your business based on that, there is nothing unique to your business. There will be no special sauce. That sauce can only come from you. Nobody else can give that to you.
Awesome advice. Naman, always a pleasure. It's hard to find time with you given how busy you are, but I'm very glad you could make the 2-hour trip, not on a drone and a car, but hopefully one day in a drone that can transfer humans as well. But thank you for making the time, and then always a pleasure.
Awesome. Yeah, great to be here.
Awesome.